Hi, I'm Neil. Welcome. And today we're going to be talking about modern cloud operations. And with me today, I've got Dirk Anderson.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for hosting. Glad to be here, Neil.
Yeah, so just a little bit about me before we kind of kick off. My experience, I've been working in the industry really for about 30 years now.
Yeah, I know. I've been with you most of them. But
And, for the last 20 or so years, sort of building and managing high-performing teams across on-premises data centers and in cloud. And I guess for the last maybe 10 years, really switched from being, a customer to the provider side, firstly with Red Pixie, as you know, and then through acquisition from Hewlett Packard Enterprise and on to BlakYaks for the last 2 years. So Dirk, can you give me a little bit about your background in the industry?
yeah, you've kind of stolen a bit of my thunder, actually, Neil. Very similar potted history to you. I've been working in technology for around 30 years now. Started back in the days of mainframe before it moved into the world of client server and then ultimately onto cloud platforms. But very, very similar history. Worked 20 years looking after large technology estates within large corporate environments, and for the last 12, 13 years been delivering technology solutions, largely cloud, largely Microsoft Azure to large clients, generally enterprise-grade clients. Outside of that, I'm married, 2 children. They've both grown up. They've both left home. I like to be outside as much as I possibly can, so I get cabin fever pretty quickly if I'm locked inside. So anything walking, hiking, running, traveling is kind of good for me.
So Dirk, you and I have seen huge changes over that 30 years or so, but I think particularly within the last 10 years, a lot of changes as companies have started moving from running their infrastructures on premises in their own data centers, moving more towards kind of public cloud infrastructure. Tell me a little bit about how those kind of changes happened and how things kind of started off 30 years ago, how that's kind of changed and how that's accelerated now with companies moving to public cloud.
The change has been profound. It's kind of crept up on people, but if I think about my 30 years in the industry, I started by looking after mainframe environments, as I said at the intro, moved on to client server platforms, and that was an actual evolution. They largely replaced the mainframe environments, the predecessor environments. So that was a pretty significant change, but there was an awful lot that was wrong with client server platforms. The very notion that you would have a single server platform that would host a single server operating system, then host a whole variety of conflicting applications, caused us a whole number of problems within the industry. So that was largely replaced by hypervisor technologies, VMware, Microsoft, Hyper-V. And that solved a couple of pretty significant problems within the industry. One was it gave us much better consolidation ratios. So we were able to get more from our server-based technology and data center investments. It also removed a whole bunch of single points of failure that existed architecturally with client-server platforms. So the fact that those technologies got deployed in robust, resilient clusters just solved a lot of those problems.
I was going to say, but I think, as much as it solved problems, I think it's probably caused a number of problems that have kind of come off of that. And tell me a bit about that.
Caused as many, right? So I guess the biggest single issue that I experienced was virtual machine sprawl. So Windows servers, Linux servers, a whole variety of variants on each side. We ended up with, across the industry, and certainly within large customers, we ended up with thousands upon thousands of additional server operating systems that otherwise wouldn't have been there in the client server world. It just becomes so easy to deploy Windows servers and Linux servers. We didn't have to visit data centers, rack equipment, cable up networks. We could just deploy these operating systems quite readily. And that resulted in a sprawl of virtual machines across the industry, which ultimately meant we had arguably tens of thousands of additional touch points that we didn't have before, which was largely about managing the operating system environment. So I would argue that something like 70 to 80% of the operational touch points associated with that kind of hypervisor and virtualization estate was largely to do with managing the operating system footprint, as opposed to managing the hosting platforms and the underlying hardware. It was really all about those touch points.
And that must have led to people sprawl as well, and people, more and more kind of resource hungry technology and more people required to manage those systems, right?
Yeah, I remember for sure. We ended up with a whole industry that evolved around managing all those operational touch points. Industries were created, and then the industry at large looked for lower cost operational options for doing that. Those tens of thousands of touch points resulted in generally offshore lower cost operating centers, which was the right answer to an industry problem at that point. But as we start to think about the transition away from those thousands of touch points towards more cloud native operations, and we think about all of those touch points going away, the transition from that to where we're headed now with cloud native operations is just vastly different. The skills are different, the capabilities are different, the tools and technologies are different.
But do you think, I think, one of the problems that we've seen, I think, is that a lot of companies have stuck to traditional models in terms of adopting public cloud and haven't necessarily adopted cloud native yet, or just starting to, but have got almost a bunch of legacy technology in the cloud in terms of of virtual machines.
We've seen. I guess we've been doing some of this together for about 8 or 9 years now, and most cloud transformation projects weren't transformation at all. They actually started by moving all of those virtual machines with all of those operational touch points into cloud. So you ended up with the same kind of operational overhead and burden that existed before. What we're really seeing within business now is a much higher appetite to get away from that and move towards genuine cloud native operations. And you live and breathe this stuff, Neil, day in, day out with the team that you run, the SpecOps team at BlakYaks. I'd be interested to hear from you actually just about what does that look like? What's changed? How do the skills look different? Because I know that you and I speak about this quite a lot off camera, generally speaking. But
yeah. So I think the skills that are required today very different, even from 5 years ago. And the teams that I was managing 5 years ago, the very different makeup of the people involved. I think it's much more important now and much more in demand that the skills required are very much more focused on coding, managing code bases around technologies such as Terraform, Ansible. And so, it's less about managing the VMs themselves, the networks themselves, and the rest of the kind of cloud infrastructure. Although that's still important, it's still really important to have that underlying understanding of how Azure works and how cloud technology works in general. But the people in the team, the SpecOps guys, are all coming in. They're all kind of coming in from computer science type backgrounds. They're all starting to learn code really early on in the cycle. They go through a really structured plan around learning to code and actually managing that code base rather than the VMs. And so that's really important skills to have for managing modern operations.
Sure. I mean, it's interesting for me to be around the office, and like you say, Neil, those core cloud infrastructure skills, they're still important. DNS, directory services, networking, firewalls, cloud security. We need all of the guys to have those skills. Of course we do. But all the noise I hear around the office is much more about DevSecOps and DevOps, tooling and process and method, and building really good infrastructure code modules as part of the library of modules that you guys have to manage. Now, I'm guessing there's hundreds of those modules today for managing different parts of the infrastructure and the architecture. But I guess the excitement and the mood around the office is always greater when it comes to that kind of tech. And so I think the science grads that come in go through a fairly rigorous program. And I think over and above the technology training that we do, the other thing that's really important is we hold those guys to really good standards, and there's real rigor applied to making sure that they meet the standards that we expect them to meet. So, if it seems brutal, but if they're not complying with those standards and they're trying to promote or check in code that we don't think is up to those standards, we will systematically throw that code away and they'll have to start again. Frustrating for them because it kind of stops them progressing quickly, but ultimately what we see is a much higher caliber and much higher standards when it comes to managing code with rigor. I'm a huge advocate of making sure that any customer that's got a plan to manage cloud native technologies at scale should really manage those technologies throughout their entire life cycle with code, almost with no exceptions. I think when I talk about cloud native operations kind of creeping up in people, where that comes from is most of the operational burden that exists with larger clients today is still with infrastructure as a service. It's IaaS and it's virtual machines, whether that's deployed in data center or cloud. But as we start to see them shift away from that towards cloud native platforms, container platforms, PaaS services, and managing those environments with code, those new skills become far more important. But we've got to get the underpinnings of that right. So it's not just about getting the cloud architecture right. The operational processes and getting that right is so foundational to what we do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with new technologies coming in, Kubernetes obviously becoming much more prevalent, then it's so much more critical to be managing everything with code, because it's just not scalable to manage that through the UI. And what we see when systems like that are managed through the UI, they're managed not through kind of structured code bases, is a lot of configuration drift, and that really invalidates whole sets of infrastructures for customers, and is really difficult to work your way back from. Whereas, if we're coding, if we're building the infrastructure out with code, it becomes very, very easy to kind of move back. If you make a mistake, and everyone makes mistakes even with code, right? But it becomes much simpler to reverse back out of issues and understand that you're going back to a good place.
Yeah, I mean, we're guilty of talking about tech a lot, and we're really quite purist about that and how we get that stuff right for our customers and internally for ourselves at BlakYaks. But important to understand the business benefits, right? If you're thinking about managing these platforms at real scale, and you're really disciplined about managing them through their entire life cycle with code, then the business continuity posture is stronger, the security posture is stronger, the cost profile of running those services within cloud is lower, there's less human error. Your ability to go off and just stand up whole technology architectures in another part of the world, so we can easily go and deploy an entire system out to some other country in a cloud. I know we're an Azure partner, but being able to do that in any region where Azure has a presence, that's really quite powerful. We're in a position where customers can have zero cost disaster recovery until the point that they need it, and then we're able to go and deploy their systems and platforms rapidly, entirely with code. And that's kind of the nirvana that we advocate to customers. So when we talk to customers and about getting this stuff right, it's all about that. It's all about being able to prove and derive those business benefits in the fullness of time. And the minute you start to have a kind of mixed mode of building and managing with code, but also touching the UI, it kind of invalidates your code base. And that's fine if you're managing tens of systems, but when you're managing hundreds or thousands, it becomes really important to be disciplined. And, operationally, Neil, and I know that we live and breathe this stuff, but I kind of wondered from you how COVID has changed things, over the last 2 or 3 years. I guess the professional services team at BlakYaks would have spent a lot of time on customer sites. There's certainly less of a requirement for them to do that. They've had to adjust in that way. Video collaboration, has become an important part of what they've done. But I guess for you guys, you've kind of always worked that way, I guess, remotely largely.
Yeah, we have. But it's very interesting that I think that, post-COVID, we very much not necessarily required on customer sites, but we've made a conscious effort to have a hybrid way of working so that we can match the way that our customers are starting to kind of move into offices, and so we have a kind of hybrid way of working. The SpecOps team come in probably sort of three or so days a week. And that's also really important. It's still really important to kind of have that face-to-face engagement. I think it's really, really important, particularly with, as I said, the junior, the team members that we bring in and bring through that training. It's really important for them to have that sense of being part of a mentor scheme that allows them to kind of get in touch with the professional services, the guys that have been doing it for 5, 6, 7 years or more. And so, being in the office and having those kind of water cooler moments, as we used to calling them. But being able to operate in a hybrid way is really important.
And the only exception I see to that, you guys are largely remote working from our office in central London, but some customers are starting to utilize your team for stuff that's beyond support, right? We provide the 24/7 support service that customers are looking for. But over and above that, customers realize we're quite intimate with their environment, more so than a professional services team could ever be, because you're living and breathing their environments all day, every day. And they're turning to, I'm starting to see them also turn to you guys through your capacity on demand service for just small project support. I know the professional services teams tend to work on projects that are large in nature. They require the right governance wrapped around them, tend to be a whole squad dedicated for 2 months, 3 months. But you're finding yourself involved in a week, 2 weeks here and there as part of the capacity on demand model. Right? Yeah,
absolutely. I think the way that we bring the guys through the training program, the mentor program, they get that time with the professional services teams. It does allow them to understand how that stuff works in customer environments. And absolutely, they get involved in some of the smaller projects, but they make life a little bit more interesting. But we're able to do that because of the way that we operate in that kind of hybrid manner. So tell me a little bit more about the cost benefits then, as you kind of touched on it, to businesses.
Yeah, I guess it's cost, but there's a wider set of benefits. Anybody that's prepared to listen to me, I guess quite a strong opinion about managing systems through their entire life cycle with code. And it's not because we just enjoy writing infrastructure as code as a business. It's quite cool to do, but it's entirely about the business benefits. It definitely lowers the cost profile. There's no question about that. I think customers get the full promise of cloud and the cost efficiencies that come with it by moving away from IaaS towards cloud native platforms and managing them with code. It gives companies, businesses, the ability to scale the platforms up and down at will and only pay for those platforms as and when they need them. If there's a need for a given business to expand internationally, the ability to go and instantiate those platforms quickly in any region that Microsoft Azure has a presence in, we can do that rapidly using that code base. I old enough and long enough in the tooth to have been part of those large disaster site recovery test processes that were typical and happen once a year in large businesses, certainly the banks and the regulated businesses that I worked in. We absolutely had to demonstrate that we could fail over those platforms to a secondary site that was sitting with, largely speaking, all the same investment profile that you had for the live site. We're now in a position where, as long as the Microsoft Azure platform is up and running, and if you're not using Azure, AWS, GCP, as long as there's a presence there, we're able to deploy that entire system with code just when you need it and do it really rapidly. And more importantly, trust it. I've spent whole weekends trying to recover during those disaster recovery test runs. And you're never entirely confident of whether or not you and the team are going to pull that off, but we're absolutely confident we can do it, providing we stick to the very premise that you must build and manage these systems with code.
Yeah, I think it's really important to know that what's going to come up in that disaster recovery situation, you already know what's going to come up. You're not relying on people to kind of make those judgments during that period.
When we all used to rely on superheroes, we hope this person's got it covered and they'll figure out a way to recover that system and demonstrate to the business that it's there, it's production ready. We don't have to worry about that. We rely much more on the code base now to get those systems. And of course, that's what businesses want. They want that predictability. Changes the architecture a little bit because we need to make sure we're really considered about how we manage the underlying data that these platforms use and how we replicate and make sure there's a copy of that data in those target environments. So you've still got that piece of work to do. But when it comes to deploying all of the cloud infrastructure that the applications then sit on, we can do that pretty readily with code. So, if you're a large business that's got scale to it and you've got the budget to go and engineer things in the right way, big advocate of getting it right straight out the gate.
So we've talked about our customers. How are we engaging with them? How are we kind of fitting in with customers that already have, a traditional support function in place?
Yeah, I mean, most of our customers are quite large. They've got existing operational teams, operational processes. Some of them are relatively stretched from a capacity standpoint, but sometimes from a capability standpoint. The guys are sometimes overwhelmed by managing those very large estates that we've talked about during this podcast, Neil. So, we want to slip in alongside customers as an addition, a complementary addition to what they've got in place, so that we can really set the tone for how we manage those cloud native platforms moving forward. So there's still that job to be done by incumbent suppliers or existing operational teams and the processes that those teams execute. But we want to make sure that large customers get the stuff right out the gate. So we're a really nice addition to them. Generally, it starts with a light engagement with us, to bit of discovery assessment to understand what's there, what's the nature of their operational landscape today. What are they managing on-premise? What are they managing cloud? How are they managing it? What proportion of that estate is infrastructure as a service in virtual machines? We do some of that for customers today, as you well know, because people are living in this kind of hybrid state as they transition away from that to something new. Coming alongside and giving them that additional capacity and capability that they need for the transition that's ahead over the next 2 years. But we're lightweight, easy to work with. We're responsive to customers. It's generally a matter of weeks to get up and get alongside and provide value.
So, Dirk, obviously today we've talked a little bit about the changes over the industry in the last sort of 20 or 30 years.
Thanks.
Getting grey hair and some no hair, but I think we've touched very briefly on that. So I think in future episodes we'll talk in more depth about DevSecOps, more about the infrastructure as code side and how we kind of manage that, how in the operations cycle we're dealing with site reliability engineering activities.
Yeah, no, it's really easy for us to say that stuff. But yeah, looking forward to bringing some of the guys along to talk about what that means to them and what does it really mean to get the underpinnings of DevSecOps and good infrastructure as code method right. So yeah, future series episodes to follow to cover some of that stuff in a little bit more depth. I think we've obviously gleaned over some of that today, but relevant nonetheless. Yeah.
So Dirk, it's been great talking to you today, and if other people are interested in what we've been talking about today, they can get in touch with us. For sure,
if any of what was said resonates, we're very happy to go and talk to partners, customers, one-on-one about how we see the industry and what we think should be done to get some of the bits that we're talking about right. So yeah, very, very happy to chat after this. Yeah, thanks for hosting, Neil. Cheers.
Thank you.